Ready to go.
So, hello to everyone. Hi. Welcome to our webinar on cultural awareness and how to increase your global performance. I would like, first of all, to introduce the objective of our webinar, and then I will present our speakers. So the objective of our webinar is to help you gain insights and share with you some cases on the importance of cultural awareness and discover effective tools and understand better cultural differences. So the key points of our webinars are, first, how to avoid common mistakes and learn from other companies about the mistakes due to cultural differences, how to apply efficient cultural tools to help drive performance, and hear from companies on how to succeed on diverse markets. As well, we would like to present you some solutions and tools to help you with your global strategy in your decision making. So our webinar, we hope that our webinar will bring you more information on the culture factor, on cross-cultural dimensions, on how to do your global management successfully, and on bring you more cultural awareness. I think on your side you can type for us some messages, ask questions, and we will try and answer them during the webinar or later on. So let's introduce to you our three speakers. Egbert Schramm, myself, Tatiana Miron, and Laura Druitt. So I'll start with myself, just to explain why we're here and why we think we can talk to you about the cultural awareness. So myself, I have an MBA in global management in France, USA, and China. I'm a global strategy consultant and CEO of a startup in France, which is called Prime Target. My areas of expertise are business and corporate strategy, international strategies. I specialize in SMEs in their international development and international market selection. So my mother is Moldovan and my father Russian, and I live in France, and I've lived in several countries previously. So about Laura Druitt, welcome.
Hi everyone, how are you doing? Very nice to meet you. My name is Laura Druitt. I'm an American living in France. I am a serial social entrepreneur. Very difficult to get all of that out in one mouthful. But I have lived in about 10 countries throughout Africa, North America, and Europe. And I've worked in over 50. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the importance of understanding how other cultures work today. And I'm really excited to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Laura. It's awesome. Okay, Egbert, this goes to you.
So good afternoon, everybody. Assuming everybody is dialing in from Europe. If not, good evening or good morning. My name is Egbert Schramm. I'm the Group CEO at Hofstede Insights, Global Cultural Advisory. My background is slightly different. My background is actually that I'm a forester. That's why I chose to live in Finland. There's a bit more trees here than in my native country of the Netherlands. When we talk about culture, culture is basically one of my expertise areas, and specifically the data-driven approach to culture. And that's what I'll share a little bit more about with you later on in today's webinar.
Thank you, Egbert. Excellent. So a bit of background about Prime Target at Hofstede and why we decided to organize this event today. Prime Target is helping companies develop internationally and help them decide on which market to develop internationally. And we have partnered with Hofstede because we apply in our decision-making tool, cultural data. Thank you for Hofstede Insights for accepting working with us. And we are doing this webinar in order to bring you some data, information, and share our value with you. So let's go ahead with our webinar. What is culture? Let's go through some basics and some definitions we have in the scientific magazines. And the first one I'm going to introduce is by Edward Tyler, anthropologist, who says that the culture is complete whole, which includes knowledge, belief, art, laws, morals, customs, and any capabilities and habits acquired by a person as a member of society. As well, other scientist, Nancy Adler, professor of organizational behavior, says that culture is something shared by all or almost all members of a given social group, something older members transmit to younger members, and something, as in case of moral laws, that shapes behavior and structures of one's perception of the world. So when we understood what is culture, what do we do about that? Why are we affected by culture, and when are we affected by culture? Let's be clear that in general, we are affected by culture everywhere. But as a company, we understand that each culture is different. And when we are working for a company or driving a company, we understand that, that culture somehow affects our business. But do we work? Do we manage? Do we organize ourselves differently from culture to culture? That's what we want to know. So there has been proof, and Hofstede Insights are going to talk to us about that later on, that we are affected when we manage our business internationally, when we go abroad, when we negotiate in our negotiation skills and techniques in all sides, legal, sales, procurement, service, everywhere. As well, when we manage our team. If, for example, nowadays we have companies and startups especially, we always hire the skills we need. We don't always look at what nationality they have. And in that case, we are affected by this factor enormously. When we go abroad, we do external growth and we acquire companies. In mergers and acquisitions, when you go abroad and you buy a new company, you need to consider how do you work with that company. And once again, the key point when you lead in terms of leadership, you are affected as well by the cultural dimensions. So there is a very nice graph I would like to share with you about how are we affected when we lead a company, when we manage a company in different countries. So, for example, when we ask a person, how do they view, what do they expect from a manager abroad, we can see that from Sweden to Japan, there's a huge difference in terms of expectations, what a manager must bring on the table. So when we go abroad, we should take this into consideration. And why we should take this into consideration? Because it's not just a rule, it's just for us to be, more efficient, to have an easier way of doing business. And we have seen that there are many cases, despite all the available knowledge on the cultural differences between countries and even between different nationalities in the same country, we have saw very remarkable differences how the companies act and behave internationally, how they forget sometimes to take this into consideration. So I have listed here some common mistakes we have seen. First is assuming that the market you work in is the same as your home market. And Egbert and Laura are going to share with us some data about this and some testimonies about how it worked for them. We impose the same management style as your local market. Sales team is not experienced in multicultural environment, and you are trying to sell to very diverse countries worldwide. Lack of product adaptation. This is one of the big mistakes when companies go abroad. They take the same product and they just try to sell it to all the countries abroad. As well, failure to consider the cultural implication in each decision when we act in a multicultural environment. And another mistake we have noticed is when companies with very little experience on international markets start with very distant cultural markets without appropriate preparation and resources for for this growth, for this development. So let's discuss a few examples I brought here today. We all know Groupon. Maybe sometimes we tried it because there was a big boom period when this was launched on the markets. So the Groupon example with China, when they tried to develop in China, they immediately launched. They had 80 offices, 300 employees in the first year. And what we noticed, they had millions of losses and very low margins. And immediately they came as behind the 13 first competitors. So what went wrong? They had to close down. Actually, they didn't close down. They sold their company. But what went wrong? They assumed, once again, even if it's a big company, they had the resources, they could have done the preparation. They assumed that the business model they have in one country, they just can replicate it in any, especially in such a different country as China, different in terms of culture. And so they didn't take into consideration their partner, their local partner. They were very aggressive in terms of staffing. Actually, they went after the competitors' staff, proposing different packages and deals, which actually culturally was not accepted. And as well, they failed as they didn't manage to recruit. The majority of their staff was American, and that all this together brought to their failure to conquer this enormous market, which was holding high potential for them. So failure to understand and prepare for this market brought them to losing this market and actually to give up this enormous potential for them. Another case was, we have discussed about the importance of cultural preparation when we do mergers and acquisitions. So we had, I'm bringing this case because we are in France, and this case was largely publicized in the media when Publicis was trying to work with Omnicom, a huge American company, and to do this enormous merger in order to compete with such companies like Google and Facebook. And they planned 50-50 ownership, and the deal was cancelled. So once again, we asked ourselves what was wrong. There was strong corporate culture in both companies. They didn't manage to do the blending. At both companies, the employees, as they didn't have the communication and preparation for this integration, felt threatened, and the internal cultural clashes and power struggles actually destroyed this enormous deal, which could have brought enormous potential and fight with this huge competition faced from Google and Facebook. So these kind of cases bring us to learn, to the need to learn more about cultural needs and cultural differences and how to adapt and how to adapt ourselves when we go abroad. Let's hear from Egbert.
Thank you, Tatjana. So switching into a new layout, you've already had a bit of an introduction to who I am. So I'll tell you a little bit more about who I work with and for. As Hofstede Insights, we've been in the market since roughly, give or take, 1985. We had a bit of a brand redesign 2 years ago, but practically we've been making the culture factor tangible since 1985. Now, why do we do this? Because as Tatjana already indicated, culture is a word that has many different meanings. And in our meaning, why culture is important is because in a lot of cases, just think about current date news topics, our survival as mankind at a global level, but also in terms of a company level, is dependent on making people that think differently work together, which is very difficult if you interpret the same word in a different way. So data helps to have a more objective discussion on the topic such as culture. Globally, we're about 130 people and currently active in 60 countries. So as such, fairly international as an organization. There are 4 distinct areas, and these 4 areas we work in are all taking a different look at the topic of culture. The first angle is the angle of organizational culture. The case study described by Tatiana of Omnicom and Publicis was a culture clash on multiple layers. Nationally, French-American, but also organizationally, one advertising company and another advertising company. Often companies claim to have a certain culture, but have they really measured it? So this is one area where we work in. The second area is related to intercultural management. How do different nations, countries, program the human mind in different ways? And this starts already at a very young age. Just think back to the time you were in school. Were you allowed to speak up to your teacher? In some countries amongst the audience present, I would estimate the answer would be definitely not, because there would be negative consequences to such behavior. In the country where I grew up, the Netherlands, if you would not speak up to your teacher, your parents would be invited for a discussion because you would have a problem. The problem being you did not show any initiative. Now imagine that example, and that being reinforced by consecutive teachers and your parents. Don't oppose the power holder. Don't speak up. And now you start working for a Western company that would estimate you to take the initiative. You can already understand that this is not going to work. The third angle that I'm going to share a little bit of an insight about with you today is related to consumers. So we have life within a company or an organization, but we also have life as a consumer. And what does that mean for how we consume marketing, how we consume and interpret products? So these are three main areas that I'll talk about a little bit today. The fourth area is an area where we conduct research in the area of, for example, cultural values. And these are typically research projects that we do for governments to understand how do social programs impact value building in a societal level. So let's talk a little bit about the type of clients that use this kind of cultural know-how. As you can see from the slide in front of you, culture touches every single industry. It doesn't matter whether you work in finance, in production, in marketing, every single market vertical or industry is touched by culture, but obviously in different ways. If we talk about culture, our advice would typically be you should ignore it, because it is a difficult topic. And if you can't take the time to understand a difficult topic, you should not engage with it. But the reality is you can't, because culture is all around. It's in the colors we use when we make a product presentation. It is in the structure of the presentations we use. It is in the structure of our sales pitches. Do we start with a big idea, work towards a solution, or do we start with the solution and then explain the big idea? All of this is impacted by cultural programming. So the fact that you can't ignore culture would typically lead to the conclusion that you should understand where, how, and when culture impacts your business. Because being proactive in this understanding will typically save you an enormous amount of money and time. The examples Tatiana gave earlier and examples like Tesco and its failure in the US are not failures that measure a couple of €1,000. These are failures that run into multiple million/billion dollars or euros. So cultural ignorance can be rather expensive. Now, if we talk about the first lesson, and I'll share 3 lessons today. So this is number 1 of 3. You look at the world throughout your own lenses. No matter where you look, you will always look through your own eyes. And let's do a little exercise about that. What do you see? I'll just give you a few seconds to form an opinion. And then I'll ask you the question, do you see a frog or do you see a horse? If you see the frog, I'll invite you to tilt your head sideways. And now you should see the horse. Yeah? So, simple mental biological trick I played with you. But what is the consequence of this, for example, for product design? What do you see? Obviously, for those of you that are a little bit older in age, you will see a Walkman. This revolutionized personal music consumption. But what is the meaning of the Walkman? For Japanese clients, the meaning of the Walkman was the ability to listen to music without disturbing the wider environment. For American consumers, the meaning of the Walkman was the ability to pick and make your own music. Now, this existential difference between seeing the same object but having a different interpretation is at the core of understanding which words to use to pitch your product, to build your product, to make your marketing. And there is a certain logic to this. And this logic is based on the work conducted by the person who helped us to get founded in 1985, Professor Hofstede. Now, although his research resonates or originates from the late 60s, early 70s, the work he has made public has been repeated numerous times and is the most quoted piece of social psychological research out there. It is still social psychological research, so it is not like the law of gravity. But when it comes to psychology, sociology, social psychology, it is the most validated piece of research out there. And what we do with this is help companies, clients, people understand that every country has six basic dilemmas. How do we deal with hierarchy? How do we deal with our relationship to the group? Do we have an extended responsibility morally, or do we only have that responsibility towards a little in-group? How do we relate to what motivates us? Is that performance? Is that success? Just think about the difference between a Volvo and a Porsche, and I think you can make the mental connection. Now, look at pictures of Volvo of 2019 and 2010. What happened in between? Volvo, an originally Swedish company, was purchased by Geely, a Chinese company, and the entire exterior design of Volvo became much more aggressive. This is the impact of culture on design. Why? Because in China, assertiveness, success factors sells better than topics traditionally more Nordic in nature. Take your whole family with you in a nice big car with space for the whole family. Yeah? Another dilemma is related to how do we structure? Do we need lots of detail in the way we structure so that we can anticipate that what we don't know or not? And so on. So 6 dilemmas that will help us to understand the core programming of any particular nation. That will help us to make better program and marketing design and organizational practices. You can bring this down to the personal level, and for that we have developed a set of tools that will help you to visualize what are your personal cultural preferences. So what are these glasses you have in front of you, and what might they lead to when you interact with people from selected other countries in specific roles? Because when your role is that of a superior, you'll have a different context and different expectations than when you are just a colleague or a salesperson. So bringing culture down to the personal level is a first step to making it more tangible. There is a second lesson. The second lesson, especially valid for SMEs, whether they're European or not, doesn't really matter. But it is that in a lot of funding programs, the EU as such has found out that there are 2 reasons why SMEs fail. One is a lack of capital, and unfortunately, we cannot help with that. The second is a lack of cultural awareness. And for that purpose, the EU has provided a huge amount of funding. And based on that funding, we have built what we call CubeIn. It is a learning platform which stands for cultural understanding for business expansion and innovation. You can find more information about this platform on the website link you see in front of you, cubein.eu. And that platform has a huge amount of wealth in terms of knowledge that you can use to get a top-level understanding on, at this point, a selected number of developing countries. And this project is currently still running, so it's an easy way for you as an SME to get started. There is a third lesson, and that third lesson is about how can you as a company use cultural know-how on a granular level, meaning segmented level, when you pitch a product, when you market it. And this is based on a huge research we did in 2015, 2017 with the world's largest consumer advertising organization, and has led to what we call consumer culture intelligence, basically a database that will help you to globalize intelligently in terms of marketing. Basically, what we state there, based on that research, is that the global village is a myth. It does not exist. And you can see this in practice with much more nationalism on the rise. People become more French than French. They become more Dutch than Dutch, or they become more Chinese than Chinese because of all the uncertainty in the world. What you can see is that because of an increase in immigration, is that you have many more segments in each population that react differently to the way you position your product. Now, what this therefore enables you to do, this CCI database, is to pinpoint what are the triggers that I need to push emotionally to get buy-in. What are the channels I need to use to attract people? Is, for example, LinkedIn a good sales channel, or should I go with the local sports club newspaper? Who do I let recommend my product? Is that a celebrity, or is that somebody that actually has a certain amount of expertise? How much information do I put in my marketing? A little bit, multiple times, or a lot, only once? All of this is knowledge you can use to make much better marketing impact. Now, why is this important? Because especially as an SME, what is the market that you're going to go to? Now, the nice thing about Prime Target's database and service is that you're able to get a lot of insight on each country specifically. The question for you as an SME is, do you have the resources to create specific marketing campaigns for specific countries? And for that purpose, what we enable you to do is to select market clusters. In other words, a group of countries and segments within that country that will respond simultaneously and similarly as other countries. And doing this will help you to become much more efficient in globalizing your marketing activities. So instead of having one campaign per country, you could combine several companies and several countries while still minimizing the actual investment. That is what I had to share with you. And with that being said, I'm going to give the word back to Tatjana with one final statement. And that is that if you want to know more about this, I warmly welcome you to join us in our conference in Luxembourg on November 15th, which is about the culture factor and how you use cultural intelligence to drive your business. Thank you. And back to you, Tatjana.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Egbert. Okay, I'm going to try and pull our presentation back. There you go. So that we can continue. We will pick up where we were. So thank you for as well speaking about Prime Target's tool. So once again, yes, Prime Target is helping SMEs and startups selecting their best potential export markets. I will present you a bit more in detail about our tool, but first of all, I would like to give the microphone to Laura back. Laura Druitt. So Laura, once again, you are the CEO of Pourquoi Princesse. You are an entrepreneur with huge experience internationally, and as well, you are the CEO right now of Pourquoi Princesse. Just as it happens, Laura is as well a client of Prime Target. So we would like her to give her experience. First of all, yeah, the first question is, in all your international experience, was the culture a big factor when you were acting internationally? How did it influence you? And what would you recommend to international entrepreneurs?
Well, that's a lot. But so I guess let me start. In the beginning of my career, I was a consultant for a major consulting firm in the US. And then from there, I started a tech business in the US. And then I started another tech business, but in Ghana and in Kenya. And now I'm running a children's consumer goods company that sells kids' clothing, accessories, and books. So to give you a little bit of background on what I'm doing. I guess the best way to talk about culture is through our mistakes. And as an entrepreneur, I've certainly made a lot of them. So hopefully you all can learn a little bit from the mistakes that I've made. I would say the first major mistake was in terms of business model. When I'm not with Pourquoi Princesse, but when I moved from the US to Ghana, we were working on a software program with the idea that people could just purchase the subscription just as they do in the US with just a monthly payment option. I know it sounds absolutely crazy. When I say it out loud, I almost smile, but yes, we did have that mentality when we started. And in fact, it was not at all the case because people did not have the disposable income available to pay in the way that we were paying for software in the US. So we had this idea freemium, and then we'll easily transfer them to paid subscriptions, and that did not at all materialize. However, there was a need for the software that we were selling, and what we realized is that mobile phones had just exploded across the African continent. And if we were going to make the business model work, we needed to look at how people were used to paying for things, and that was through micropayments. But it was a huge shift culturally, a very large shift, and a very, very different business model. So I think the biggest lesson for me is don't be afraid to have a lot of local people on your staff or people that are particularly from that country. Learn from your clients and understand that you may need to innovate the business model to meet the needs of the new population. And at the time when we were doing this in Africa, these sorts of micropayments had really just begun. So it was brand new and no one thought that this could work ever. But instead today our business is still running. It's called Isoko. So that is one experience. Now I am working in France, and I thought, well, I worked in Africa for over 10 years in various countries, so France and the US cannot be that different. Wrong again. Wrong again. And culture really, really comes into play. And I had a very interesting discussion with one of our partners. We are doing consumer products for kids. So first of all, there's a mentality with consumers even around spending for kids. In the US, your children are everything, and you will buy them tons and tons of clothes and tons of toys because they are the center of your universe. In France, that's actually less the case. People tend to buy clothes more secondhand for kids. Maybe they'll buy books, but it's a very different market. And it took a long time to really understand what made that tick. Fortunately, I have a French business partner, so it went slightly more smoothly. I have learned from my mistakes. But also just in terms of fashion and taste, I think, in France, Paris is really the fashion capital of the world. And so people want to dress their children in a very chic and I'll say kind of elegant way. And even the most simplest things like a sweatshirt, there's a little bit of style to it. In the US, that's less important. Comfort and practicality are much more important. So I had to really think about all of those things, and that was just incredibly different. But even more than that was marketing. Because in the US, we have a huge culture of you support a brand that has values, and Pourquoi Princesse is really a retail brand that is a girl power brand trying to break down gender stereotypes by offering products that don't exist anywhere else. And in the US, there is a tradition of supporting social startups, social businesses, brands that have values behind them. In France, people are very skeptical of that because many people think of social issues being associated with associations and nonprofits. And it's not something that a business will take on. So while I had a lot of people saying to me, oh, that's fascinating, and they were willing to support me, Lara, as the individual, they were much less willing to support Pourquoi Princess as a brand. And so always as a business, you're building a relationship with your customers. But in France, I had to spend a lot of time, and we've spent a year building a relationship with our community and informing them and talking to them about issues around gender equality and really educating them and sharing information. I think much more than I would have had to do in the US because the culture is just very different and the way brands are viewed are very different. And if I had not had my French business partner to consult with, I think I would have stormed in with my American mentality that, anything that we've done in the US, okay, we can just bring it in and transplant it. And it doesn't always work that way. And so I think with Pourquoi Princess, it's been a very powerful lesson to me about how important culture is, how understanding it can affect your bottom line exponentially. Because I think if we had just charged in with this product approach where it was sell, 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 we would not have the relationships and the community that we have today in France, where we're able to sell because that trust has been built over time. So that's really kind of just two examples of differences in culture that I've experienced in my career. I'd be happy to answer any other questions that you may have in a little bit. Moving on, I think Tatiana had asked me, should you take culture into account? For me, it's completely obvious. And I always look at statistics. I look at hierarchy. I did consulting in various countries for years. And before I went into any country, I did a lot of research on the culture, on how to approach people, on how to influence people. If you're going to be successful in another environment, you need to understand what makes people tick, because education systems are different, social structures are different, and that's how people live. It's also that diversity and richness that is so exciting, and I absolutely love it. And it's why I've been in America and living abroad since 2004. But it's just absolutely important and crucial to everything we do. And I guess the final thing I want to talk about is with Prime Target, because I am a client. And Pourquoi Princess is based in France, but we have a global strategy because we're based online. And so where the message was more similar than Canada. I thought Canada would be way up at the top, but in fact, no. And what really helped me in the reports was looking at keywords. There was an extensive research even done on Twitter on specific keywords, how that was affected, because I'm a company that's dealing with a lot of values, social movements, that sort of data was just incredibly important to me. And again, helped me to focus my marketing efforts on where I was going to be able to achieve more and make more money more quickly. So I think that's all I have to say, and I'd be happy to answer any more questions in a little bit.
Oh, thank you very much, Laura. That was great. So I'm going to just take a phrase from Egbert. Culture is all around. This is it. And I'm going to give another citation from a partner who is online and listening to us, and who told me that when you are abroad and you actually feel that you don't fit in, then you feel the cultural difference. So this is how we can resume. I speak very often with different companies, and sometimes here in France or in other countries. And recently, one French company which is doing engines for machinery, for equipment for agricultural industry, they have been bought by a Chinese company, and they've been saying that during this merger of the company, there have been a lot of struggling to understand each other. And even though the company was happy to be acquired by this company because it opened for them a new enormous market, at the same time, to get accustomed to how to work with each other, both, the Chinese counterpart and the French counterpart, they wanted to work each other. But even when you want to work each other, understanding and achieving that is not always easy. So Egbert spoke about Tesco. Tesco case we didn't bring up yet. Maybe we'll have time to talk about it. We still have about 17 minutes to go. I would like to present right now how Prime Target thought that we could help SMEs. So we have noticed that 15% of SMEs, only 15% of SMEs, let's put it that way, have an export strategy. So they do not select efficiently their markets, international markets. And as a result, they lose a lot of resources and time. And all this brings to inefficiencies. And what we want actually today is we want more SMEs and companies to bring their resources, to bring their values internationally. So what we would like to do is to bring them tools to help them with this decision making. And as, once again, resources are limited, we have managed to develop a tool which allows access, opens access to SMEs and to startups like Laura's to access to the reports. So what we do is we will give you immediate reports and analysis. We do recommendations in our reports because there is an analyst working. It's data specific for each company. We can ask different companies, and none of the reports you will be receiving from us is repetitive. For each company, we will use adapted data and needed data to the decision making. And as well, what we think we have done is we've brought innovation because we have included Hofstede data. We will talk about this later. And we have included social media analytics, which is quite new into international market selection. And we have built this platform, which allows you to receive your report in 48 hours. So all you need to do, if you are deciding tomorrow to export and you don't know yet where, you log on a request, step number 1. You tell us who you are as a company, the product, and your export needs, basically which countries you want to go. And we will deliver strategic analysis and reports, customized rankings, full of data, which will help you to decide where to export next. And the following step, this all is available in one single report or monthly report with alerts on how these markets behave. Why? We have a question about audio problems. Can you hear us all? Before I continue, maybe let's check this one.
We can, I think, at least here in the north, but it seems that in some cases the connection for some people is a bit less good.
Okay, Nora says it's working fine for her. Joe has a problem.
I think it's maybe worth noting that we're recording the webinar, so then we can share it with the audience afterwards.
Okay, Okay, it's a little bit distorted for Sheena, but okay, for Sandra, others can hear. So maybe we can carry on and then we'll share the webinar online. So what's our application and how is it connected to the cultural awareness? Because this is the topic of our discussion. The cultural factor is sometimes, in some companies, when we do consulting, the major decision-making indicator before we recommend them where to go next. In case of Laura was, let's say, in terms of percentage, in terms of decision-making, we can say about 30 to 40%, because this is how important is the difference compared to Laura's profile and her company's profile towards other countries. So it's hugely important. Depends on the company we're going to analyze. So that's how important it can be for some companies. So what do we do? How do we deliver you this knowledge about the cultural profile of your company, which is available thanks to Hofstede Insights? And what we deliver next is all data expert for your company. It's a very reliable tool because all the data is verified and controlled, and our data science specialist makes sure that everything is delivered accurately. It allows you as well to build an expert business plan in few days, and we think that it's a very easy to read tool. So you can
confirmed.
So you can see on the slide here the link to test our application. You will receive this by email and as well an email for myself. So just to give you a visual on how our reports look like. So you will have a ranking. You will have some information about the market data. Sometimes we will use 4 or 5 sources of information to help you in this decision. We will talk to you about your trends in your domain, in your market. We will give you data about the customs duties and the volume of exports if it's a product. And as well as Laura said, we will, with the keywords about your own company, meaning in Laura's case, the keywords we took were about empowerment, about girls, equality rights. And sometimes we will even look at the competition to see if your competitors are present on the social media and they are present in the countries you're analyzing. And here you can see the data used from Hofstede in terms of how to visualize the cultural profile of your company. So I would like to go a little bit in details on that. I'm not going to go in details on 6 dimensions model because Egbert was nice enough to present it already. And why did we decide to take this into consideration? Once again, I have said that sometimes for some companies, it's one of the main factors we take into consideration. It helps our clients to gather insights on cultural differences and how to position themselves. And as well as Egbert spoke about clustering. Clustering in terms of cultural differences and as well adapting their approach and as well their products to those markets. And in 48 hours and with this tool, you will be able to have a preparation before you decide to which markets you can go and decide with confidence which market you should target and gain time and resources and take your best results, the best possible results. And sometimes what our clients do, thanks to our reports, they will have this first best potential market selected for them. So basically they have 1 to 5 countries recommended. And then you have the possibility to go into details and do a detailed market research to understand better which actually is the first market you are going to go and develop there. So we have here another business case which I worked with. It's a company, Victor Steckley, the CEO of Sportspread. How we helped them. He was supposed to be with us here, but he had to travel to Munich, so he was not able to make it. he had the same question. He is already an experienced business man. They are working in more than 20 countries, but there are some struggles in terms of development in some countries, and he wanted to check what would be our recommendation for them to go next. And then he really appreciated the way we helped them understand and read the data and try to understand what didn't work correctly on some markets. And once again, the cultural profiling and advice for each country helped a lot, because Hofstede Insights provided us not only with how each country is compared to another country, but as well through our platform, we are able to give each company recommendations so that every time before they go to a country, they can log on our platform and they can have specific advice on how to work with each country, which is very useful. It's very useful to prepare yourself before you do some business development or professional development, for that matter, before you go there. So before we say thank you, I wanted to bring once again the case about Tesco, which Egbert mentioned before. Maybe Egbert, can you give us your opinion, and then I'll go in details about this case. You spoke about the Tesco case in the USA. In my case, I wanted to speak about Tesco in Japan. Maybe give us your thought about what happened in the USA, and then I'll talk about Japan.
So maybe first, as a disclaimer, Tesco is not one of our clients. So the information I'm giving is an outside view on what might have happened. Obviously, the US, UK both speak English, or a version thereof. And the consequence of that is that typically we think that people that are very similar to us think alike. And this typically can lead to huge cultural mistakes, especially if mistakes repeat themselves. So now seeing the example of Tesco in Japan, and Tatjana will share a bit more on that. The fact that Tesco continues to hit its head is also a potential reflection on the company culture. Because if you make a mistake once, it might simply have been a chance. But if you make a similar mistake in your export business multiple times in a row, then it's a sign of an organization that is not advanced enough in terms of knowledge to be aware of the fact that different markets require different business models and different ways of interacting. So my note on this example of Tesco specifically is that it tells me something about their company culture as such.
Okay, what happened in Japan, that was a very interesting case, because Tesco as a company in the United Kingdom, they are very successful. They have succeeded to gain such a market power. And when they went abroad, they were quite certain, once again, is that they will just copy-paste their business model and they will replicate it anywhere. So it's as well, sometimes, I don't know if Egbert is going to agree, or Laura is going to agree with me, is sometimes we can see that from very developed countries and strong companies. Not willingness to understand that they will have to adapt sometimes. So they went to Japan with the same type of stores, and they have replicated the low service large stores to Japan, which is not the culture of the market at all. In Japan they have a different kind of needs and different kind of habits. And they managed to gain less than 1% of the market share with huge losses. As you said, Egbert, more than hundreds of millions of losses. And for SME to make such a mistake is just impossible. It's a risk you cannot take. That's why we are trying to bring to to bring the point of importance of taking into consideration of the cultural factor. And cultural factor is not only affecting us as a person, but is the way we do business and try to do business abroad. And as a matter of fact, because of their failure, they had to exit the Japanese market. And what went wrong is, once again, in Japan, we like to go to the small stores, and we want to have great service, and we want to have quality products, and we want as well the products to be adapted to our taste, because we like different flavors. And Japanese value the personal touch. Every time you give them something, you need to add a personal touch to the product. And they are very based on community stores. And basically they are ready to pay higher prices for the better quality. So, and when you don't listen to what the consumer wants, and when you don't understand that you are going to a new country, so basically you do a proper preparation to that country, then of course you prepare to fail. So once again, the global village is a myth, and culture is all around, and it impacts us in everything we do. And we need to take this factor into consideration in our international marketing design. And we need to adapt our resources to the new markets, and sometimes prepare ourselves for these differences. And in the case of Laura or other companies, when we go to very culturally distant countries, it's actually very wise to take a local partner. And for example, we another case of Hofstede Insights is when they go internationally and they have many offices, they always work with local partners, and I think they are the best ones to tell us why. Your mic is off.
Also, just unmuted the microphone. Yeah, so if we bring the question back to also your daily reality as an SME, why do we choose typically to go with local partners in specific cultures? Is because if you talk in SME terms, I mean, we're not talking millions, we're typically talking about opening a new market will cost you on average 100,000 to 200,000 euros. And that is the cost of acquisition, cost of operations, etc. 90% of startups fail. 90%. So if you would prefer to be part of that 10% to succeed and not waste 2 years and 200,000, investing a relatively small amount to preserve that amount of money and time, that is the reason why typically we advise to understand when going with a local partner is very useful. And when you select local partners, to understand what type of service model or business model and market business product proposition you would need to design. So it is this aspect of consciousness that will help to be successful in new countries, not just your home country. And that's basically the reason why we as Hofstede Insights always explore that option of the ability of going with a local partner, because it is always a combination of local market knowledge and having something new to offer. And that's the strength of basically being both global and local.
Yeah. Okay, so once again, thank you, Egbert, Laura, and thank you for all our attendees. I would like to welcome right now the questions. Do you have any questions? So we have here Nora. I spoke to you, Nora, already. Joe, Lucy, Sandra. Do you have any questions? Can we help you with some other examples or testimonies? And how do we do it?
I think typically the easiest way in order to preserve the audio quality is that if you have a question, if you use the chat screen, I have seen that most of us have been able to find it. So if you type your question there, then we'll be able to reflect on it.
They can You can type in your questions on the chat screen. There you go.
Okay, so how long does it take to know a new culture?
Good one. Thank you, Sandra, for this question.
Laura, Tatjana, would you like to go first?
I'm going to allow you to start, Egbert.
Oh, thank you. So I would say it depends to which extent do you want to know the culture. Some people say you need to understand the language before you understand the culture. My answer would be, of course, slightly biased. I typically say I can explain any culture to anybody within 10-15 minutes.
Really?
And this is why we use a model, because the model will describe the central tendencies in a culture. And that is typically enough at the outset to understand where can I anticipate what type of challenges or what type of opportunities. If you want to know more about the precise do's and don'ts, then typically I would advise to reserve 2-3 hours and read a good book on a particular country, or simply use Wikipedia. Because the internet has a huge amount of knowledge. But if you want to understand the central tendencies in a certain culture, just log into Prime Target, have a look, or at our country like webpage, the country comparison, and you'll get an overview of the 6 central tendencies in any society. At the moment, I think we've got a database of over 110 countries. Now, of course, the world has about 200 countries, I believe, so we're missing 90. But if you understand somewhat of the history, somewhat of the legal system, the education system, then typically using other countries for which we have data available will allow you to make a pretty good estimate on a top level. If you want to really know the details, of course, it takes a bit more time.
Okay, I have thank you, Egbert. I have a question. Can you type in it's to our attendees the country you are coming from, you are connected from, to see our multicultural dimension?
And while she's doing that, I'll just add, I think you can, like Edgar said, get a basic knowledge of a culture very quickly by reading things online. And yet at the same time, culture is a bit like peeling off an onion, layer by layer. And the deeper you get in, sometimes the more you're like, I don't understand anything. I've lived in France for 5 years. I speak French fluently. I'm married to a Frenchman. I have a family here. I have many friends. I feel like I've strongly integrated into the culture. And yet for our business, it does come back to who is the audience? What is the message we're trying to portray? And how am I going to send that message out in a way that people understand? And that's where the importance of a local partner does come in, because there are years of culture built into thinking a certain way. And so you can get that global understanding and be sensitive to it. But I do feel like you also need a local partner to help you balance out.
So we have a new question here.
So if we talk about the 6D framework, as Laura mentioned, culture is a bit like an onion. So we can, of course, understand the symbols. Do you give a card with one hand, with two hands, etc.? Do you use your titles or not? The value part, which is the core of the onion, and that's the basis of the 6D model, is where we have all that data available. Now, how you use that data in practice is to basically very quickly understand, for a variety of topics, how do I, for example, structure my sales material? So if you have a culture that has what we call more hierarchy, and it has a larger amount of uncertainty avoidance, and France is an example of this. People need to understand the big philosophy behind the service, and they also need to know the detail. That applies for France. The same applies for Poland. The same applies for Hungary. The same applies for Romania, because all these cultures share the same kind of tendency in terms of hierarchical thinking and higher uncertainty avoidance. If you take a country for comparison of the UK, which is low on hierarchy and very low on uncertainty avoidance, if you start with a big philosophy and lots of details, people will lose you after the second minute, because they want to basically have nitty-gritty, action-oriented information. So this is how you would use that type of knowledge to structure information flow. Same would basically apply for communication between different employees. So if we take the example of Publicis and Omnicom on a national level, French versus the US. The US is rather black and white in a lot of its thinking. It's very short-term oriented, very action-driven, very low in that sense in terms of long-term vision. If you match that with the French approach, which is big philosophy, lots of details, more long-term future, meaning a bit more flexible in its thinking. You can go left, you can go right, as long as you go forward. That's when already in the whole acquisition process, you start having different communication flow. And on the shop floor, the working floor, people will get completely frustrated with managers not giving enough information or giving too little information or giving way too much information. So leveraging the 6D model is a bit like key performance indicators as a dashboard. It will give you some, and again, I'm saying not the old, like the complete, it's not one-on-one, it's not 100% guarantee, but it will give you a better understanding of what is the likelihood that people will behave in certain ways in groups. So that's how you use the 6D model. Understand the specific issue. Is it structure of information? Is it giving feedback? Do you do that personally? Do you do that in a group? All of this can be explained by kind of playing with the 6D model.
A brief example of that is looking at prime target. So in France, in the US, if I want to sell my goods, I can just email a company. I'm not there. I send an email. I send my lookbook. I send my price list. We may or may not have a phone call that lasts 20 minutes and the sale is done. But in France, I have to go to a shop, which is what I've been doing today just before this, visit them 3 to 5 times, have an hour-long conversation about life and all of those things before anything moves forward. It's just, it is different. But if you don't have that basis on the difference, like Edgar said, if you don't have that model that directs you in the right way, you're completely taken aback by that. And you could think, hey, okay, I'm never going to make a sale, or this is impossible. But if you understand and you have this just background knowledge that this is the way the culture works, you're prepared, you feel more confident to go in and make things happen and adapt.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? If not, I think we have come to the end of our webinar. I would like to thank once again all of the attendees. First of all, thank you for your interest. You'll receive an email from ourselves with the presentation and as well with the link to the video. I would like to thank once again Egbert. Thank you, Egbert and Hofstede Insights.
More than welcome. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Laura. Laura Druid, thank you very much for coming. So we would like to say merci beaucoup. Thank you, and good luck with your international development, and let's hear from you good news.
Looking forward to staying in touch with everybody. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We're eating.